Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
James watched Olivia in the living room mirror as she adjusted her red dress for the third time. It was a dress he'd never seen before, tight enough to turn heads, with a neckline she usually avoided. The perfume she'd applied was different too, not the soft floral scent he'd given her for her birthday, but something stronger, almost provocative. She put on dark red lipstick, checked her loose, wavy hair, the style she only wore for special occasions, and grabbed the small evening clutch that had been tucked away in the closet for months. James, 32, an architect with his own steadily growing firm, sat on the couch with a half-finished glass of whiskey. He wasn't the jealous or insecure type. In their 7 years of marriage, he'd always trusted Olivia. She was a marketing manager at a reputable agency, ambitious, intelligent, and up until that point, he believed they were a team. But over the past 3 weeks, small details had started forming a pattern he could no longer ignore. It began with the messages. Olivia had always left her phone unlocked, but recently she'd started typing in passwords and turning the screen face down whenever he came near. Then came the late-night meetings, the calls she took while stepping out of the room, the faint smile she tried to hide while texting. James also noticed the credit card statements, expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never visited together, lingerie purchases from stores he'd never seen, payments at boutique hotels downtown. He wasn't the kind of man who confronted without certainty. James was methodical, rational, used to working with precise blueprints and calculations. So he waited, observed, and mentally noted every inconsistency. Olivia claimed she was in client meetings, but when he casually called her office, the receptionist mentioned she'd left early. She said she was too tired to go out with him on weekends, yet old photos appeared on her social media as if they were new, masking her real activities. The night before, James found a crumpled receipt in her coat pocket, a dinner for 2 at an upscale steakhouse, at the exact time she said she was on a video call. That's when he knew it wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real. Olivia was living a parallel life, and he needed concrete proof before taking action. So that Friday, when Olivia walked down the stairs in that new dress, that strong perfume, and announced with disturbing nonchalance, "I'm going out tonight, okay?" James felt a strange calm settle over him. It wasn't explosive anger, nor desperation, it was clarity. He set his glass on the coffee table, stood slowly, and looked her straight in the eyes. "If you walk out that door, don't come back." Olivia stopped in the middle of the room, her clutch already slung over her shoulder. She blinked, as if processing his words, then let out a short, almost nervous laugh. "Seriously, James? Drama now? I'm just meeting some girlfriends for drinks." "You're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting," he replied, his voice steady and even. "If you step through that door, the marriage is over. It's that simple." She rolled her eyes, adjusted the strap of her bag, and shrugged. "You're being ridiculous. We'll talk when I get back." And without another word, she opened the door, walked out, and closed it behind her with a final, decisive click. James listened as her car started, heard the tires crunch over the driveway gravel, and waited until the sound faded completely. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the number he'd saved 2 days earlier. "Garrett? She just left. Red dress, silver car. You have the plate. I want everything documented, photos, video, exact time, location, who she's with. Don't lose sight of her." Garrett was a private investigator James had hired 48 hours before, after finally accepting he needed solid proof. A discreet man, former police, with an impeccable reputation. James didn't want just suspicions, he wanted irrefutable evidence. As he waited, James opened his laptop and reviewed the emails Garrett had already sent over the past few days. There were records of Olivia checking into downtown hotels in the afternoon and leaving 2 hours later. Blurry photos showed her dining with someone at secluded restaurant tables. But no clear image of the man's face. Until then, James didn't know who it was. But he had a feeling tonight would be different. An hour passed. Then 2. James couldn't eat, just sat in the dark living room, staring at his phone, waiting for the call. When it finally buzzed, he answered before the second ring. "You're going to want to see this in person," Garrett said, his voice low and serious. "She's at a bar downtown, the Crimson Lounge. And James, you know the guy." James's stomach tightened. "Who?" "Ethan. Ethan Morrison. Your junior partner." A long silence followed. James felt the air leave his lungs. Ethan. The 30-year-old he'd hired a year and a half ago, the guy he'd mentored, who was building his own client base within the firm. Ethan, who joined them for dinners at their house. Ethan, who greeted James every damn morning with sincere smiles and firm handshakes. "You sure?" James asked, his voice hoarse. "Absolutely. I'm watching them right now." She's sitting on his lap in the corner of the bar. Kissing, hands all over each other. It's not subtle, James. It's blatant. James closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. "Send me the address. I'm on my way." "You sure?" "Might be better to wait and gather more evidence before." "I'm going now." Garrett sighed on the other end. "Okay. But don't go alone. Bring someone with you. A witness always helps." James hung up, grabbed his car keys, and made one quick call before leaving. "Richard? It's me. I need you to come with me right now. No time to explain, but it's about the divorce. Bring a standard separation agreement and your camera. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. Richard was the family attorney recommended by a coworker. James had discreetly consulted him the previous week just to understand his rights, options, and legal process. Richard was direct, pragmatic, and immediately recognized the urgency in James's voice. The drive to the Crimson Lounge was fast and silent. Richard asked no questions, just reviewed documents on his tablet while James gripped the steering wheel tightly. When they arrived, Garrett was waiting outside, a professional camera hanging from his neck. "They're still in there. Table in the far left corner." She ordered champagne. "They're celebrating something," Garrett reported, showing photos on the camera's display. James looked. There was Olivia, laughing, head thrown back, as Ethan whispered something in her ear. His hands were on her waist. The intimacy was undeniable, repulsive. "Let's go in," James said, his voice calm but loaded. Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay calm. No yelling, no violence. You want to walk out of this as the reasonable one, not the crazy one. Got it?" James nodded. The three of them walked into the bar. The lighting was dim, jazz played softly in the background, and the place was filled with couples and groups at scattered tables. James headed straight for the left corner, where Olivia and Ethan were so absorbed in each other they didn't notice him approaching until he stood beside their table. "Olivia," James said, his voice cutting through her laughter. She turned and froze. Her smile vanished instantly. Her eyes widened, and she pulled away from Ethan as if burned. "James, what are you doing here?" Ethan, meanwhile, looked like a man who'd just seen a ghost. He stood quickly, tripping over his own chair. "James, this isn't what it looks like." "Not what it looks?" James repeated, with an ironic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Funny, Ethan. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my junior partner is sleeping with my wife. It looks like you two are celebrating something. Maybe the fact that you thought I was too stupid to notice." Olivia stood up, her voice trembling. "James, please, let's talk at home. Not here. Not like this." "Oh, now you want to talk at home?" James crossed his arms. "Interesting. Because when you left earlier, I warned you. I told you, if you walk out that door, don't come back. And you laughed at me. You thought I was being dramatic. Garrett, standing a few steps behind, lifted his camera and began discreetly taking photos. Richard remained beside James, holding a folder of documents, watching everything with a detached, clinical gaze. Who are these guys? Ethan asked, his voice an octave higher. That's Garrett, the private investigator I hired to follow my wife, James replied calmly. And that's Richard, my divorce attorney. They're here to document everything. Olivia went pale. Divorce? James, you can't be serious. I'm very serious. And you, Ethan, you're fired. Effective immediately. And more than that, I'm reviewing every contract you've handled in the last 6 months, because something tells me this goes beyond a simple affair. Ethan started sweating. What are you talking about? I'm talking, James said, stepping closer, about the fact that 3 proposals I submitted to major clients were leaked to competitors. I'm talking about confidential meetings mysteriously cancelled. I'm talking about you using my wife to steal information from my own firm. Ethan's expression changed. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was exposed guilt. Olivia turned to him, confused. What's he talking about, Ethan? He didn't tell you? James let out a bitter laugh. Olivia, do you really think he was interested in you? Do you think this is some romance? He used you. He knew you had access to my files at home, that you saw my emails, that you were in on everything. And you, naive as you were, handed it all over on a silver platter. Olivia clutched her purse to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. No. Ethan, tell me it's not true. Ethan didn't answer. He just looked down. Richard stepped forward and placed an envelope on the table. These are the separation papers. You have 48 hours to sign, Olivia. No negotiations. You lost that right when you walked out of the house tonight. James, please, Olivia begged, tears now streaming freely. I made a mistake. I was an idiot. But we can fix this. We can. No, James interrupted, his voice firm but without anger. We can't. You made your choice. And I've made mine. He turned and walked toward the exit. Garrett and Richard followed. Behind them, Olivia sobbed, and Ethan remained silent, defeated. Outside the bar, James breathed in the cold night air. He didn't feel immediate relief, but he felt something close to it, clarity. He'd made the right decision. In the weeks that followed, James acted with surgical precision. Olivia signed the divorce papers under pressure, without contesting. Richard discovered that Ethan had indeed passed confidential information to a competitor in exchange for money, and James filed a lawsuit for breach of contract and misappropriation. Ethan was fired, sued, and eventually investigated for unethical conduct by the Architects Association. Olivia tried contacting James repeatedly, calls, messages, lengthy emails begging for forgiveness. James never responded. He blocked her number, archived her emails unread, and moved forward with the divorce. The house stayed with him. Assets were divided according to law, but James proved Olivia had diverted money from their joint account to pay for hotels and dinners with Ethan, so he recovered a significant portion. James's architecture firm didn't just survive, it grew. With Ethan gone and the dishonest practices exposed, James regained the trust of former clients and attracted new projects. He promoted from within, brought in fresh talent, and focused on his work. Olivia, on the other hand, wasn't as fortunate. The affair story spread quickly through their social circle. Her agency, aware of the scandal and her connection to Ethan's unethical behavior, chose not to renew her contract. She lost her job, lost mutual friends who sided with James, and eventually moved to another city. 9 months later, James was at a downtown cafe when he saw Olivia. She sat alone by the window, looking at her phone with a weary expression. Her hair was shorter, lacking its former luster. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the sophistication James remembered. She looked smaller, faded. He thought about leaving before she noticed him, but something made him stay. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Olivia looked up and saw him. For a moment, neither moved. Then she slowly stood and walked over to his table. "James," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "Olivia. Are you okay?" He nodded. "I am." She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with what looked like regret. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" James looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger. No bitterness. Just indifference. "Yes. You did. I just wanted you to know that. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am." He took a sip of coffee, set the cup back down, and stood up. "I believe you are. But it really doesn't change anything." Olivia looked down, tears forming again. "Are you seeing anyone?" James picked up his jacket and draped it over his arm. "That's none of your business anymore, Olivia." He walked past her without looking back and left the cafe. Outside, the sun was shining, and for the first time in months, James felt truly free. Olivia belonged to a past he'd closed with dignity. He didn't need elaborate revenge, he just needed to move on. And that's exactly what he was doing. James returned to the office that afternoon and reviewed the week's projects. There was a new proposal from an important client, a residential complex that could become one of the year's biggest contracts. He smiled at the initial sketch, it was exactly the kind of challenge he needed. That evening, he had dinner with a group of friends he'd drifted from during the turbulent final months of his marriage. They laughed, told stories, and James realized he'd regained not just his peace, but his identity. He wasn't the betrayed husband anymore, he was James, the architect, the friend, the man who'd chosen dignity above all else. Weeks turned into months. James started dating again, met new people, and eventually met someone, an engineer named Clara, smart, funny, and honest in a way James hadn't experienced in years. They took things slowly, carefully building something solid. Olivia, he heard through mutual friends, was trying to rebuild her life in another city. She'd landed a modest job, moved into a small apartment, and apparently cut all ties with Ethan right after the scandal. James didn't feel satisfaction hearing this, he just felt indifference. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier. James signed the final papers on a Tuesday morning, without ceremony or drama. Richard congratulated him for staying calm and level-headed throughout the whole process. "You did everything right," Richard said, shaking James's hand. "You kept your dignity, protected your assets, and walked away as the man of integrity. I don't always see that." James thanked him, but deep down he knew the real victory wasn't in signed papers or recovered assets. It was in the fact that he'd refused to become someone he wasn't. He hadn't given in to destructive rage or petty revenge. He'd simply made the right choice at the right time, and moved forward. A year after that fateful night in the red dress, James stood on his office terrace, watching the city stretch out beneath a golden sunset sky. Clara stood beside him, her hand intertwined with his. "You thinking about something?" she asked. James smiled. Just how life can change in one night. How one decision can change everything. "Do you regret anything?" He turned to her and shook his head. Not for a second. And it was true. James had learned that broken trust can't be fixed, that dignity isn't negotiable, and that sometimes the best way to win is simply to refuse to lose. He'd given Olivia the chance to choose, and she had. And he, in turn, had chosen himself. That red dress, that strong perfume, that closing door, it had all become just a closed chapter. James had turned the page and was writing a new story, one where he was the protagonist of his own life, not the victim of someone else's. And as the sun set over the city, James felt a deep peace. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.